right. Anyway, in a short while, we will be joined, there'll be a briefing here by the president of ECOSOC, Ambassador Bob Ray, along with Catherine Russell, the executive director of UNICEF. They will be here to brief you on the situation in Haiti. What is going on? Wait, was that you, Benno?
No, it was behind me somewhere.
It was Adla, okay. No, because Adla makes a mistake and you turn red. That's the way it works. All right, settle down. Sorry, now you have me. The briefing is being organized in conjunction with ECOSOC's special meeting entitled Haiti's Children's Cannot Wait. 2 p.m., Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who, as you know, is the president of the Security Council for the last month of the year, will be here to brief you. I will start off with Syria, as I've been asked today and yesterday about our reaction to the events. I can tell you that the Secretary General is indeed alarmed by the recent escalation of violence across northwest Syria. He calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities, reminds all the parties of their obligation under international law, including international humanitarian law, and calls for an immediate return to the UN-facilitated political process in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. The offensive launched by Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, an entity subject to Security Council sanctions, along with a broad range of armed opposition factions, shifted front lines that had been static since 2020. There are reports of civilian casualties, displacements of tens of thousands of people, damage to civilian infrastructure, and an interruption of essential services and humanitarian aid. All parties must do their utmost to protect civilians and civilian objects, including by allowing safe passage to civilians who are fleeing hostilities. Syrians have endured the conflict for nearly 14 years. They deserve a political horizon that will deliver a peaceful future, not more bloodshed. The Secretary General emphasizes the urgent need for all parties to seriously engage with Geir Pedersen, his special envoy for Syria, to chart a comprehensive path out of the conflict in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. And on the humanitarian front, I can tell you that we, along with our humanitarian partners, and their operations now across parts of Aleppo, Idlib, and Hama remain largely suspended due to the obvious security concerns. Humanitarian workers are unable to access relief facilities, including warehouses. This has led to severe disruption in people's ability to access life-saving assistance. The United Nations remains committed to staying and delivering and is working to carry out assessments and expand humanitarian response efforts as soon as possible. Humanitarian activities in other areas not impacted by the current fighting are continuing. This includes assistance for those newly displaced in parts of northwest Syria, with at least 15 NGOs actively supporting reception centers, as well as distributing food, water, fuel, tents, blankets, and hygiene kits, as well as other essential items. They're also working on health and waste removal. The 3 border crossings from Turkey used by the UN to deliver assistance into northwest Syria have remained open. However, essential services in many affected areas have largely been suspended. A key water station for western Aleppo city remains inoperable as maintenance teams cannot access the site due to the ongoing security situation and the hostilities. Schools, of course, have closed in many areas, with at least 13 schools in northwest Syria damaged by hostilities over the past few days. And public health concerns are escalating, including due to the presence of unburied bodies and lack of drinking water. Aleppo University Hospital sustained damages that have left hundreds of patients without essential care. At least 24 health care centers in Idlib and western Aleppo have suspended operations due to hostilities. The main hospital in Idlib has also been affected. And as you know, Syria is also already one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, with 16.7 million human beings in need of assistance and over 7 million people internally displaced. More than 500,000 people have also fled from Lebanon to Syria in recent weeks, and winter conditions will only make the needs in the coming weeks even more acute. Turning to Cairo, and our Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, who, as you know, represented the Secretary General at the Cairo Ministerial Conference to enhance humanitarian response in Gaza. The Secretary General had been scheduled to attend. Delivering the Secretary General's remarks at the official opening ceremony, Ms. Mohammed warned that conditions for Palestinians in Gaza are appalling and apocalyptic, and that what we are seeing may well amount to the gravest of international crimes. The Secretary General noted that in the face of gigantic needs, humanitarian aid is outrageously being blocked. We must demand that all parties comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, that the parties must comply with their obligations under international law as well as international humanitarian law, and that the delivery of aid must be predictable and it must be sustained. In the afternoon, at a joint press conference with Badr Abdel Ati, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, the Deputy Secretary General noted that Mr. Guterres had repeatedly said that nothing justified the 7 October abhorrent acts of terror by Hamas, nor the taking of hostages, and nothing justifies the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Ms. Mohammed pointed out that Israeli measures, including the recent Knesset bills, are preventing UNRWA from doing its job, and our staff members themselves have outrageously also been killed, many in the course of their work. The Deputy Secretary General stressed that enough is enough, and the cycle of death, destruction, and denial of aid must end, adding that leaders can put an end to the crisis in Gaza. Both remarks have been shared with you, and on the sideline of the conference, the Deputy Secretary General also met with a number of heads of delegation in attendance. She is on her way back to New York as we speak. And turning to the situation in Gaza itself, OCHA colleagues warn that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are being displaced again and again as they face critical shortages of food and of water. Our humanitarian colleagues continue to risk their own lives to provide assistance to those who need it. On Saturday, Israeli airstrikes killed 4 humanitarian workers, 3 from World Central Kitchen and 1 from Save the Children, raising the total number of aid workers killed since October of last year to 341. In response, as you will see, World Central Kitchen suspended its operations in Gaza. In a statement from our humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, Mohammed Hadi, he stressed that the continued killing of humanitarian workers is unacceptable, violation of international law, and further intensifies the catastrophic humanitarian situation. And our humanitarian partners are also warning that local food systems have been devastated by military ground operations, the bombardment of civilian areas, and the presence of unexploded ordnance. They report access to food remains the most critical concern raised by community members across all groups. That's women, men, girls, and boys. Our colleagues for the World Food Program said that for more than 50 days, barely any food has entered the besieged areas of northern Gaza Governorate. That's Beit Lahiya, Beit Hanun, and Jabalia. One exception to that happened yesterday when WFP was able to send 200 food parcels with a humanitarian mission led by the World Health Organization to Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahiya. That assistance successfully arrived. Meanwhile, food security across the Gaza Strip is worsening, with people becoming more vulnerable by the day. Bakeries, a lifeline to the people of Gaza, are unable to operate due to lack of fuel and flour, making bread scarce. On Saturday, 2 girls and a woman died during a crowd surge at a WFP-supported bakery in Deir el-Balah. In a statement, WFP said the tragic loss highlights the dire food shortages driving people into desperation, urging authorities to ensure secure conditions for aid delivery. Meanwhile, WFP also notes that commercial cargo into Gaza is at its lowest points in months. Fresh food and meat are rare, and when they're available, prices are alarmingly high. In central Gaza, a wheat flour bag can cost as much as $200 and about $100 for a tray of eggs. Turning to Lebanon, the humanitarian situation there, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the UN and its partners are pivoting our efforts to meet the needs of displaced people who have started to return to their communities, those who remain displaced, and host communities, and those who've never left areas that were impacted by the hostilities. According to the International Organization for Migration, in the first 24 hours after the ceasefire took place, nearly 580,000 people have begun returning to their communities. As of November 30th, national authorities report that nearly 90% of displaced people in collective shelters have left, though more than 22,000 people remain in approximately 400 sites. UNHCR, for its part, tells us that more than 28,000 people have crossed from Syria into Lebanon since November 27th. The number that crossed from Lebanon into Syria exceeds 560,000 people since late September. Though people are returning to their communities, OCHA says that challenges remain, including damaged infrastructure, limited services, safety concerns, and of course, there's always a threat of unexploded ordnances. Meanwhile, WHO is prioritizing the repairs of at least 14 hospitals and addressing the risk of disease outbreaks. And UNICEF continues to support water supply systems with some 1.5 million people benefiting from 95 infrastructure repairs since September of this year. UNICEF is also providing emergency water, hygiene, and sanitation support for 500,000 people. To date, UNICEF has also conducted 14 humanitarian convoys, reaching more than 49,000 people in hard-to-reach areas, with plans to continue that work. And a new assessment by our colleagues at UN Habitat and their partners estimate that more than 15,000 buildings have been partially, fully destroyed in the south and Nabatea governorates, while the World Bank reported earlier in November that around 100,000 housing units have been partially or fully damaged. And moving on to the events in Busan in South Korea, following the adjournment of the fifth session of negotiations of an international legally binding agreement on plastic pollution yesterday, the Secretary General urges countries to work through their divergences to craft a meaningful treaty that goes to the heart of the crisis of plastic pollution and its impact on the environment, our health, and of course our future. The more than 3,000 delegates, which included member states representing more than 170 countries and observers from more than 440 organizations meeting in Busan, adjourned the session with an agreement to take forward a new text that will serve as the starting point for negotiations that will resume next year. Inger Anderson, the executive director of UNEP, said in a statement that the talks in Busan have made good progress towards securing a deal that the world demands, but she added it is clear that is persisting divergences in critical areas and more time is needed for those differences to be addressed. And earlier today, the Deputy Secretary General Mina Mohammed addressed via pre-recorded video message the opening of the 16th session of the Conference of Parties to the Convention to Combat Desertification, which is taking place in Saudi Arabia. She told participants that as we mark 30 years of the convention, never before have so many people been affected by land degradation and drought. Ms. Mohammed urged delegates to focus on three priorities. First, strengthen international cooperation on land degradation and restoration. Second, ramp up restoration. And third, prioritize a mass mobilization of finance to scale up investment. The COP16 continues in Riyadh until December 13th. Turning to Sudan, our colleagues from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tell us that hostilities in Al Jazeera states are continuing to displace people there at a massive scale. The International Organization for Migration reports that as of Saturday, November 28th, more than 393 people fled locations across the state in less than 6 weeks. As you may know, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, traveled last week to both El Geneina, the capital of West Darfur, as well as to Adre in Chad, where displaced people spoke of their needs for shelter, nutrition, health services, and schools for children. He warned in the statement at the end of the visit that the world is not responding with enough solidarity or support for this crisis. Local communities in Chad who have welcomed hundreds of thousands of their Sudanese neighbors since the conflict began told Mr. Fletcher that resources are wearing thin. For his part, he reiterated the people of Sudan and the humanitarian communities that support them need funding to meet the scales of needs. They need access constraints to be lifted, and they need the laws of war to be upheld, and they need the fighting to stop. We and our partners will continue to provide a range of support, including food, water, nutrition, and shelter assistance to those displaced, most of whom have been arriving in Gedaref, Kassala, and River Nile states. OCHA stresses that whether they leave or stay, civilians must be protected and safe passage must be provided for those who choose to leave. And staying in the general area, our peacekeeping colleagues in the Democratic Republic of the Congo report continued progress in the National Disarmament, Demobilization, Reintegration, and Community Stabilization Program in the eastern part of the DRC. The peacekeeping mission supports that program. In a significant development in Beni, North Kivu, the Congolese army handed over 23 children, including 6 girls, over the weekend to the UN mission. The children were rescued during a joint operation conducted by the Congolese army and the Ugandan People's Defense Forces in Beni, as well as Lubero and Biakato in Ituri. Many of the children had been associated with the ADF and Mai Mai armed groups. They've since been transferred to national NGOs for psychological support and reintegration into their homes and into their communities. Moving closer to New York and in Haiti, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says the situation in Port-au-Prince, it remains fluid and volatile. Despite the challenges, we and our partners are continuing to do our best to support Haitians in needs. WFP continues to scale up its operations to meet the escalating food needs. The World Food Program has reached 1 million people in Haiti in November, marking the highest monthly coverage this year. In the past week, WFP and its partners delivered more than 350,000 hot meals to people who've been recently displaced by violence. That was in Port-au-Prince area. They were displaced by violence in Port-au-Prince. And on some days, WFP reached 50,000 people with those hot meals, the highest ever daily volume of hot meals ever provided by WFP in Haiti. The agency is also ramping up assistance to people who are not displaced but who are facing emergency levels of hunger in neighborhoods where they are living, often in areas controlled by armed gangs. A large-scale distribution of rice, beans, and cooking oil reaching nearly 150,000 people in and around the capital is currently wrapping up, with more rounds of similar distributions planned in the coming weeks. WFP is also distributing rations to people facing emergency hunger outside the capital, including in Artibonite and Northeast Department, as well as continuing with school meals programs, which are reaching 470,000 children across Haiti. And moving back to Europe and Kosovo, I want to flag that the Secretary General Special Representative for Kosovo, Caroline Ziade, condemned Friday night's attack targeting the Ibar-Lepenac water canal in the Zubin Potok municipality in northern Kosovo, which caused critical damage to essential civilian infrastructure and interrupted water supply. She said that a comprehensive, transparent investigation is imperative to identify those responsible and to hold them to account. She also recalls the importance of upholding human rights and fundamental freedoms for all communities as the police operations and investigations are conducted. She also calls on all parties to refrain from speculation and divisive rhetoric. And in Ukraine, our colleagues from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tell us that in the first 10 months of this year, more than 630 humanitarian organizations provided assistance to 7.7 million people across Ukraine. Between the 29th of November and December 1st, hostilities resulted in many civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure, including schools, railways, gas facilities, which is what aid workers and local authorities are telling us from the frontline regions. In response, humanitarian organizations delivered emergency aid, including hot meals, warm blankets, emergency shelter material to repair the damage and to ensure that people are prepared for the notoriously harsh winter conditions as temperatures begin to drop. Meanwhile, our colleagues also tell us that in October, attacks resulted in deaths, damage to homes, schools, and hospitals, prompting people from frontlines Kharkiv and Donetsk regions to seek safety elsewhere in the country. At least 24 health facilities and over 50 Educational institutions were destroyed or damaged, primarily in frontline areas, which are experiencing relentless fighting, according to WHO and the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. 2 days to mark today is the International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. An estimated 50 million people worldwide are trapped in horrific conditions, from human trafficking to forced labor to sexual exploitation or forced marriage. In his message, the Secretary General calls on all forces to detect, report, and abolish contemporary forms of slavery in all its forms. And yesterday was World AIDS Day. This theme this year was Take the Rights Path. In his message, the Secretary General said the fight against AIDS can be won if leaders take a rights-based approach to ensure that everyone, especially the most vulnerable, can get the services they need without fear. You've endured me, I will now endure you. Deji.
Yes, first on the Syrian situation, Aleppo now again be taken by the rebels. You just mentioned about the impact for humanitarian operations. What about UN staff there? Are they safe?
Yes, we have our UN staff is all reported safe. We have both national and international staff in those areas, and we are taking the necessary precautions.
Have they gone to let's say Damascus or Hama or Homs, or they
I'm
just
not going
staying?
to comment right now on what we may be doing with the staff, but I can tell you we will continue to support the humanitarian operations as best that we can.
But with the airport in Aleppo taken by maybe Kurdish people or maybe the rebels, would that be still available for UN to?
I don't want to speculate in how we will deal with staff movement at this time.
Okay. Another thing is Kyiv Post reported this, said those rebels are Ukrainian trained. It seems there's this kind of tie between the Ukraine crisis, Syrian crisis, and now Syrian crisis with Middle East crisis, and then DPRK. Do you worry that this kind of trend is still going on to connect all those conflicts together?
Look, I have no information one way or another on the presence of Ukrainian troops outside Ukraine. So
It's not Ukrainian troop; it's a Ukrainian train.
I have no information on that one way or another. The fact that we are in a period of growing conflict in different parts of the world is no secret, and the fact that there are connections between these conflicts is also no secret. Benny, then Margaret.
So Hezbollah took a responsibility for shooting at Shaba farms. Israel is saying that it will respond strongly. Any comment from UNIFIL on whether and who is violating the ceasefire agreement?
Look, we have. I think first on the bigger picture, we very much welcome the cessation of hostilities. I think it's very important that both parties most involved, Hezbollah and the IDF, do whatever they can to preserve the cessation of hostilities, and that member states will do whatever they can to support that. For our part, the United Nations will do whatever we can as well. UNIFIL has reported a number of cases of firing across the blue line in both directions.
So I don't understand. UNIFIL has a role to play, is what you told us?
Let's take a step back. In terms of UNIFIL's, in terms of the United Nations official role in monitoring the ceasefire, we are in touch with the parties, notably those that negotiated the ceasefire, to see how exactly that will work within the mandate of the mission. So those discussions are ongoing. So right now, what I'm telling you is just what UNIFIL has witnessed in terms of firing across the blue line.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to ask is, you've said before when we asked a few times about whether UNIFIL should stay within battle.
Can you put your microphone a little closer?
You said before when we asked you a few times whether UNIFIL should stay within the war zone, you said that UNIFIL has a role to play.
Yes.
According to the Security Council resolutions.
Yes, it's
so what is its role now in observing the?
Okay.
I mean, you said that we are in consultations, but according to the Security Council resolution, they're supposed to be there to monitor.
Okay, so UNIFIL is implementing its mandate as to Resolution 1701. As to the specific role of the United Nations in monitoring the cessation of hostilities, that is being worked out in discussions between the United Nations and the parties. And we hope to have some clarity for you as soon as practicable.
And on Syria, one more question. Sorry about that. Since there are so many players involved, I'm talking about obviously it's Russia, Iran, Turkey, and all those. Is there any mediation on the UN side between those state parties?
Well, I mean, what I can tell you is that on Syria, our special envoy, Geir Pedersen, has been very active on the phone over the last 48 hours, speaking to his interlocutors. I expect the Secretary General to be making phone calls as well. But the overall message, I think, from Mr. Pedersen is that, you know, we've been in a phase of conflict management, which is clearly failing, and we need to move actively into the phase of conflict resolution through Resolution 2254. Our efforts will continue in that vein. Abdelhamid. Oh, sorry, Margaret. Sorry, Margaret, then Abdelhamid.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up to Benny's question and then one of my own. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut tweeted today that Major General Jasper Jeffers was there and meeting with the Prime Minister, and he will advance the ceasefire agreement by assessing implementation and providing military technical advice, it says. I'm wondering if he met with the force commander of UNIFIL or with Ms. Hennis-Plescher.
I don't have, I'll try to get
To
you some-
discuss your
some-
role.
I understand. I will.
Okay, if you can find
Your
out.
own question.
And then my own questions on Sudan. First, just to tell you I'm listening, you said, IOM said 393 people fled in less than 6 weeks. I assume you mean 393,000
Yes.
or
Did I misread
higher?
it?
Well, you just left out, you just said
Okay, I probably-
393.
okay,
If you
let
could
me-
just check it.
Yes.
And then my real question is, Medicine Sans Frontières.
Yes, 393,000. Thank
Okay,
you.
that sounds more like it. And then MSF said today that Zamzam camp was attacked by the RSF. They've been shelling it since yesterday. 450,000 people are living there. Do you have any confirmation of that? Do you have any reports from your people
I
on the
don't
ground?
have any confirmation beyond what MSF had said. We'll check with OCHA, but we have no doubt of the veracity of the MSF information. You're talking about a camp where people who are in famine conditions are being attacked. I mean, it's hard to describe that horror. Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Stéphane. Follow up on the question of violation of the ceasefire lines. The Lebanese sources reported 60 Israeli violations of the ceasefire. Hezbollah responded, and he said in a statement, if Israel continues to violate the ceasefire, we will be obliged to respond. That is what happened. I hope you are aware of the.
Well,
these
I mean,
developments.
what is your question?
My question, I'm correcting just some information. That is,
Well, I know, but
it's
just
60
I'm happy. Abdelhamid, I'm not here to quote information from the Lebanese armed forces. I'm here to report on what the UN is saying. I'm not doubting that other people are saying other things. So I'm saying what I'm saying on behalf of the UN, but I'm happy to take your question.
Okay. My question is that Adnan Abu Hasna, the spokesperson for UNRWA, said the following, that the Israeli occupation forces has the capacity, complete capacity, to protect the convoys. in the areas where these trucks were stolen, that's what he said, okay, are
Abdul
very
Hamid,
close.
With due respect, you're
No, I'm
you're
gonna
quoting a
ask
UN
you.
official to me. What is?
Okay,
No, I'm happy to
I'll
take
end
your
mine.
question, but what is the
Why
question?
you are not patient with me when I
I'm
ask
trying
questions?
to be patient, but you don't need to read back what are
No,
you.
I want to reach that
Okay,
point.
go ahead,
When
sorry.
I was telling
okay,
you, it's
let's-
near the Kerem Shalom, where these trucks were stolen, and he said completely under Israeli control. Do you still believe that these 98 trucks were taken by Palestinian?
I think a lot of
pro-Hamas groups?
first of all, my understanding is that a lot of trucks were just destroyed and disabled.
Not has nothing to do with Israel.
I'm not saying we're dealing in a we're talking about running an aid operation in a conflict zone. I'm not saying it has nothing to do with the parties to the conflict. Our focus in trying to get food to Palestinians, we were unable to in that convoy on a massive scale. The trucks were either stolen or destroyed.
Okay, my last question about the number of Palestinians killed during the weekend. At least there were 200 Palestinians were killed. A journalist was shot inside the hospital. Have you followed these reports about the number of Palestinians killed during the...
Our colleagues are in Gaza. They're fully aware of what is going on. Joe, and then Evelyn, and then Sirife, sorry.
Thank you. First of all, a follow-up, and then I have a real question.
Every question is a real question, unfortunately.
I hope so. Anyway, the follow-up is if you can confirm again something you previously said, which is that the UN, as a matter of policy, would not accept support from the IDF for security of the convoys. So can you confirm that? Because that's what you previously said.
We will not be escorted by the IDF. Our convoys will not be escorted by the IDF. The Israelis have a responsibility to create the conditions where aid can be distributed safely. Your second question.
Okay. Relating to Syria, prior to the latest developments in Aleppo, can you tell us what steps or measures, if any, have been taken toward the convening of this constitutional committee or other steps to try to achieve a political settlement? I know now it's been disrupted, obviously, but prior to that, well, it was a cold peace.
Well, Mr. Pedersen and his team have been trying to move the process forward, trying to get the parties together. We have the political roadmap, right? We have 2254. As the convener, whenever we are, the UN as a convener can only keep pushing the parties to meet, can only keep pushing the parties to put the interest of the Syrian people first and foremost. But unfortunately, we can't force anyone to do anything.
Can you provide any details as to which of the parties have been most resistant to the convening of this constitutional committee, or is it just from
Look,
both
I think
sides?
we have seen, and I won't, not about the constitutional committee only, I think we have seen different parties to the conflict being reluctant at one part or another to move the political process forward. Sirife, then Evelyn.
Thank you, Stéphane. I want to go back to Gaza. As you've mentioned, the World Central Kitchen announced it's suspending its operation after an Israeli airstrike hit its colleagues. And also UNRWA, I think, announced on Sunday that it'll be suspending the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza through the Israeli-held Kerem Shalom crossing. I do realize you don't like it when we make the personal comments, but to me it looks like Israel is really putting in its policy of starving off the population, and it's doing it rather effectively. But how do you evaluate this?
We evaluate this that I mean, I think I read out the evaluation, the continued lack of food, the continued inability of us to have the right conditions to distribute aid without being shot at. The fact that more than 100 hostages remain in the tunnels held by Hamas. The fact that there is no political horizon. I mean, the facts are are pretty clear and they're pretty horrific. Evelyn.
Thank you, Stéphane. Just some brief follow-ups. Is Kerem Shalom the only functioning crossing?
No, there are a number of other functioning crossings.
Because we keep
Yeah, I know,
mentioning
yeah, but there are a number of other
Yeah,
functioning crossings.
Okay. And secondly, is in Syria, is anyone in touch with President Assad, or is he considered part of the problem?
We are in touch, our colleagues are in touch with all the relevant parties. Who did I say? Sorry, Volodymyr, I think, yeah.
Thank you, Stéphane. Two parallel events have just been held simultaneously at the UN headquarters. One was hosted by Russia, a presentation of the so-called technical guide on protecting critical energy infrastructure against terrorist attacks. The other event was organized by Ukraine and a group of countries, protecting critical energy infrastructure of Ukraine against the attacks of the Russian Federation during the war. How do you think, is it evidence of a UN crisis when a state that attacks the energy infrastructure of another country tries to teach other states how to defend themselves against such attacks?
Look, this is the UN as a convener. Member states are free to organize whatever the events they want to have. I think we have been very clear in condemning attacks on civilian infrastructure, including energy infrastructure. I think every day, including today, I highlight the destruction of attacks that we've seen by the Russian Federation on critical energy infrastructure in Ukraine and the impact that it will have on Ukrainian civilians during the winter. Yes, sir. Sorry, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Is Secretary General concerned about the new EU Foreign Minister Kaja Kallas' remarks regarding the potential deployment of European troops to Ukraine? And does he see this as a possible step toward further escalation?
Look, we have been speaking out for an end to this conflict and not to encourage any further escalation from one side or the other. We want to see an end to the conflict for the sake of civilians in Ukraine, for the sake of civilians in Russia, and we want to see an end to the conflict in line with General Assembly resolutions, international law, and territorial integrity.
So, sorry, does he think that this may lead to further escalation?
I think we're not in the speculation business.
Okay.
Sinan.
Thank you, Steph. I have two questions, if you don't mind, about Syria.
Only two?
Thousands of Kurds and 5,000 Yazidis previously displaced from Afrin because of the Turkish operations are stuck in their cars and roads while trying to leave the Shahba area of Aleppo as the Turkish-backed group and Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham attacked them. And the Syrian Democratic Forces says that they are working on to evacuate them, but the corridor has been blocked by those groups, like two groups. And I wonder if UN is trying to open this corridor to help them to reach out to northeast Syria.
I don't have any operational details whether or not we're specifically working on that on that road being blocked. But what is clear is that all parties to the conflict, whether they are state actors or non-state actors, have a responsibility under international law to ensure that civilians are kept safe, whether they choose to flee, like the people you mentioned, or whether they choose to stay. Everything should be done to allow people to seek safety and to do it without fear of being attacked.
And the second question is, the Turkish-backed group Syrian Nation Army released a video on social media that shows they captured 2 Kurdish female fighters, and you can see in this footage they are basically abusing and torturing those female fighters. Do you have any comment on that?
I haven't seen the video, nor can I speak to the veracity of it, but what I can tell you is that anyone who is detained or taken prisoner needs to be treated humanely under established international law, and any release of video showing that kind of behavior is unacceptable and to be condemned. Madame.
I have two questions. Thank you so much. The first one is about the special envoy to Syria, Mr. Pedersen. He emphasized, he encouraged the groups to comply with the resolution 2254 in 2015,
Yes.
and that part of it is to change the constitution. And plus, this attack on Syria is a group of terrorists, several of nationalities engaged. Is part of this group will be part of the negotiation, even though al-Nusra and the other
I think
group
the answer to your question is that Mr. Pedersen has engaged with all relevant parties, including different, I would say, probably not the official word, but federations of different groups under different umbrella groups, and we will continue to do so. Your second question.
The second question about the open border between like the Turkish and the Syrian. We see all these terrorist group is coming from the Turkish side. Plus, the Turkey is taking advantage of the Syrian conflict in order to, for example, building the biggest hydraulic dam that eliminate the water of Furat.
What is the question, please?
That's the question. Is to eliminate the water of Furat to the Syrian government, to the Syrian people, also to the Furati, to the Iraqi people.
What is the question?
The question is there any action going to be against or eliminating the Turkish government from doing any wrong action against any state sovereignty, which is Syria or Iraq?
Look,
Are they going to put elimination?
Every member state has an obligation to respect the sovereignty of other member states. Michelle Nichols.
Thank you, Steph. A little closer to home. Have any senior UN officials spoken with anyone from the Trump transition team yet?
When I have something to share with you on that front, I will gladly share it with you.
You're attempting to set something up?
When I have information to share with you, I will gladly do that. Mr. Vacara.
Thank you very much. Subject is freedom of the press. And is a follow-up to this question. Actually, Trump has chosen Kash Patel as his. Let me finish with the question. To head FBI, and Patel has called for prosecuting journalists. Any reaction from the Secretary General?
I will save you. I don't know what I'm going to save you. I'm going to save myself here. I'm not going to engage in commenting on who may lead what agency with the next U.S. administration. That's just not my job here to do. Our long-standing fight for freedom of the press, for human rights, and will continue unchanged. Speaking of freedom of the press, Mr. Klein, and then that'll be the last question.
Okay, I have something I really have to live up to here. But in any event, my question is...
okay, I'll get you as well, Iftikhar. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. My question is if you have any comment on the video released by Hamas of the Israeli-American hostage, and which many observers consider to have been a coerced script that he was reading. Would the Secretary General consider that a violation of international law?
As you know, the Secretary General has been regularly meeting with the families of hostages and former hostages, and has been following those developments very closely and very personally. It is yet another opportunity to call for the immediate and unconditional release of all the hostages held by Hamas. It is hard to imagine that any video statement recorded by someone who is being held hostage is anything but coerced, and I think it goes against everything that we stand for. Mr. Iftikhar Ali.
Thank you, Steph. By now, most of my colleagues have asked questions regarding Gaza, but I have one, and that is, according to press reports, Israel has banned Azan, which is a Muslim call for prayer, in all the mosques in Israel, which Muslim leaders have described as an attack on Islam. Any comments on this?
I have not seen that report, but obviously people should be able to practice their religion freely anywhere they live. Please stand by for a few more briefings, and I'm done.
That's perfect. You're the sweetest. I will just let them